My mother-in-law tore my dress right in front of 300 people. She didn't hesitate at all while tearing it, not even blinking. She just gripped the fabric with both hands and tugged at it as if she'd been waiting for this moment for 2 years. The music stopped. Champagne floated in the air, and no one knew what was about to happen. Three of New York's most powerful figures turned to look at me as I stood in the middle of the Harlow Grand Ballroom, wearing only my underwear and a jacket borrowed from a stranger more moral than anyone else in the room. And Carter, my husband, was 15 meters away and did nothing. Listen to me to the end because you'll want to hear about the revenge I'm going to take. So, get ready. I'm starting. My name is Elena Voss. Or that's the name I choose to live by. This is the story of the worst night of my life and the most magnificent revenge I didn't have to take. Let me take you back a bit. I met Carter Harlow 3 years ago at a dinner party with a mutual friend in Manhattan. He possessed that relaxed, skillful charm that men from wealthy, established families have. He had a beautiful chin. Even his posture at the table drew me in. He made me laugh twice in one evening. I thought it was a sign. What I didn't know then was that behind every Carter Harlow, there was a Margaret Harlow pulling the strings. We dated for 8 months before he proposed. In those 8 months, I saw his mother 4 times. Each time she looked at me the same way, as if I were a stain on her favorite tablecloth that she hadn't yet figured out how to remove. She was a strange woman. She never asked me anything about my family. She never asked where I grew up, what I believed in, or anything like that. She only asked one question in 4 different ways, at 4 different dinners. What exactly do you contribute to this family? I always smiled and changed the subject. What she didn't know, what Carter didn't know, was that I could answer that question with a number. A very large number. My father, Richard Voss, built Voss Capital from scratch in a garage in New Jersey in 1987. Today, he manages $43 billion in assets. I grew up between a penthouse in Manhattan and a private mansion in Connecticut. I went to school in Switzerland. I knew what real wealth looked like from the inside out, but I had seen what that knowledge did to people. I watched my friends grow up never knowing if someone loved them for who they were or for the number added to the end of their last name. I watched my mother, before she died, spend her last years wondering which relationships were real. So at 22, I made a decision and changed my perspective on the world, my position, everything. The only thing I didn't change was my last name. Because it was a pretty common last name, I started working as a graphic designer. I was in control of my own life. I even paid my own bills. My father called me brave. My therapist called it complicated. I said it was necessary. Carter never questioned that. She assumed I was exactly as I appeared. A pretty, normal girl from a respectable family, lucky to have married into the Harlow family. Her mother made me understand that luck every day of our marriage. I didn't expect the punishment I would inflict on her in the end. I tried everything in the first year. I learned her favorite flowers, white peonies, and had them brought in every Sunday. I memorized how she liked her coffee, what topics made her eyes light up, and what made her withdraw. There were times when I'd arrive early for every family meal and stay late clearing the table while Carter's younger sister, Diana, sat there doing nothing, glued to her phone. None of it worked. No matter what I did, they weren't happy. Diana was even worse, especially since women who smile while hurting you are always worse. At family meals, she would hug me and whisper something near my neck. You know, Carter dated a Vanderbilt before you, right? Keep that in mind. Then she would pull back, smile at me, and ask if I wanted more wine. He was just like the devil. Carter would overhear these conversations but say nothing. Later, when I brought it up, he'd say, "That's just how Diana is," or, My mother didn't mean it that way, and I started to believe them. The most painful part of this kind of torture is how slowly it progresses. The first year, I tried everything. I learned her favorite flowers, white peonies, and had them brought over every Sunday. I memorized how she liked her tea, what topics made her eyes light up, what made her withdraw. I'd arrive early for every family dinner and stay late helping clear the table while Carter's younger sister Diana sat glued to her phone, doing nothing. None of it worked. Nothing I did had the slightest effect. Diana was even worse, especially since women who smile while hurting you are always worse. At family dinners, she'd hug me and whisper something near my neck. You know, Carter dated a Vanderbilt before you, right? Keep that in mind. Then she would pull back, smile at me, and ask if I wanted more wine. Carter would watch these conversations and say nothing. When I brought it up later, she would say, "That's just how Diana is," or, "My mother doesn't mean it that way," or, "What made me feel most invisible. Can we not do this tonight, Elena?" I'm tired. I've started to believe them. That's the insidious thing about this kind of cruelty. It's slow-moving. It doesn't come with one devastating blow. It comes like 1,000 little cuts, until one day you look in the mirror and realize you've been bleeding for years, and you can only apologize for this mess. The Harlow annual charity gala was in October. Margaret hosted it every year at the family estate in the Hamptons, 400 acres, a ballroom large enough to fit a small concert hall, and a guest list that would make Forbes magazine's dreams shine. It was her night. To coordinate the quiet auction, manage to coordinate the quiet auction, manage the seating, communicate with the catering companies. Like his assistant. Carter said, "This is his way of involving you." And I believed him because I needed something to believe in. I spent 6 weeks just on these preparations. I arranged everything, seated the 4 families who might have argued in different places. I arranged the florist. I made a good deal. I made a profit of $9,000. I wore an elegant dress to the gala night. There was nothing ostentatious. The party was everything Margaret lived. Crystal everywhere. A string quartet. Waiters in white gloves. The women wore dresses more expensive than most people's rent. The men were loudly wailing on sofas and calling it charity. I was walking between the auction tables, checking the bids, when Diana came up to me. "My mother wants you in the back," she said with that smile. Something about the jewelry display case. I should have known, but I went. Everything would change from here on. In the back hallway near the cloakroom, Margaret stood with 2 society friends. Both watched me with expressions I couldn't decipher as I approached. "There you are," Margaret said. Her voice was bright, showy, already addressing an audience. "I have a small problem, and I think you can help me." She suddenly raised her voice. It wasn't a shout. It was something sharper. A projection. It was positioned to reach from the partially open doorway all the way to the ballroom. "My diamond bracelet is missing," she said. "From the Harlow estate collection. Worth about $400,000. And I think you were the last one near the display case." I looked at her. "I wasn't near the display case," I said carefully. "I hadn't been in this room all evening." "There are 3 people who saw you there," Diana said, suddenly appearing from the doorway behind me. That wasn't true, of course. Margaret's voice lowered, almost to the point of being gentle. This made it even more frightening. "If you give it back, we can handle this quietly," she said. "No police involvement, no crime scene investigation or anything like that. Just give it back, and let's close the case." I listened with my mouth agape, thinking about how I could defend myself with every word. "Your bracelet isn't with me," I said slowly. "Then you'll let us search you," she said. That's when I understood what was about to happen. This was a new game to erase me from her life. But they had no idea what I was going to do. Pulled. The fabric tore. I will never pulled. The fabric tore. I will never forget the sound it made when it ripped. The dress fell from my shoulders to the floor. My hands instinctively tried to catch it, but Margaret stepped on the hem. On purpose. She really did step on it. Diana moved to close the door, and I stood in the middle of that corridor, in the middle of the ballroom, with a mouth wide open behind me. Someone was gasping for air behind me, then another group of perverts. Then 300 people were staring at me, 300 people watching me there, exposed, humiliated, trembling so much I could barely stand upright. Margaret announced to the people in the ballroom, "She hit it." Her voice was perfectly calm. "We needed to check." Someone next to her quietly said, "There's nothing there." Margaret looked at me, then turned to security and said, "Please take her out." I looked for Carter and saw him instantly. He was frozen in the room where everyone else was moving. Our eyes met, and I held my gaze for 3 seconds. He was the first to look away. I knew exactly what I was going to do to Carter, but I had to get out of this situation. A security guard touched my arm and I didn't resist. There was nothing left to resist. They led me through the crowd, and as they passed, I could hear what people were saying. I was going to make them pay for all of this. Finally, they brought me to the outside of the iron gate, left me there, and closed the door. I sat on the stone steps in the October cold. A young woman from the cafeteria staff, perhaps 19 or 20 years old, came out a minute later and, without saying a word, draped her staff jacket over my shoulders. I held the jacket with both hands, trying to cover myself. I was crying at the same time. I wondered what my mother would say if she were here. Then I borrowed the girl's phone and called my father. He answered immediately. "Dad." My voice completely broke with that single word. It shattered. "Dad, I need you." There was a brief silence. Then, "Where are you?" I told him everything. Everything that had happened. The setup, the accusation, the torn dress. Everything. With my voice barely audible, I managed to say to my father, "Hurry. Don't move," he said. He was only 25 minutes away. I told him I was in the Hamptons. In 18 minutes, the car's headlights were illuminating the street. It wasn't just one car's headlights, or two. 6 black Escalades were following one after another. Then a familiar car, of course, my father's private car, followed by 2 more. I realized one of them belonged to the firm that handled Voss Capital's legal affairs. My father got out of the car and came straight to me. At first, we didn't say anything. We just looked at each other until he arrived. My eyes were filled with tears. He immediately took off his jacket, removed the tablecloth I was wearing, and gave me his jacket. I hugged my father and started crying. At that moment, I wanted to hug my mother too, but unfortunately. Then he started walking towards the mansion. I could watch his face turn angry. The doors opened before the security team reached them. My father entered the Harlow annual charity gala as if he had been invited, because, as it turned out, he really had been invited. Margaret had sent a courtesy invitation to Richard Voss of Voss Capital 8 weeks earlier, just as she had sent to all the powerful people within a 300-mile radius. She just didn't expect him to use it. The atmosphere inside changed when my father entered. He didn't take the microphone. There was no point in raising his voice. Everyone was silent. When Richard Voss spoke in a room, the room adjusted itself so that it could hear him. "I apologize for interrupting the evening," he said. "It's extremely pleasing. I'll keep it short." He looked at Margaret across the room, and Margaret looked back at him, and I watched the expression on her face at that very moment. I watched the color drain from her face in an instant. "My name is Richard Voss," he said. "The woman you just left outside your door in the cold is my daughter. My only daughter. My heir." He said this for 3 whole seconds. "I want to introduce her to you in a proper way. He extended his hand, and I stepped right beside him. I looked awkward in my father's jacket, but it was better than otherwise. Now, my father continued, I want to show you something. She gestured to one of her team members. The large decorative screens around the ballroom, the ones displaying charity statistics all evening, shimmered and changed. All the security camera footage and everything else was there. I was particularly surprised she'd had all that prepared in the car on the way. The first clip showed the untouched jewelry display case, with a timestamp clearly indicating that Elena Voss, that is, me, hadn't come within 20 meters of it all night. The second clip showed Diana. Quickly, nervously, she opened the display case, took out the bracelet, and placed it in the small bag she was holding in this room. The third clip was the one that took the room's breath away. Margaret and Diana, a private room. 45 minutes before the gala began. She's going to cause a scene, Diana's voice said over the loudspeakers. She always does. She won't, Margaret replied. She never does. That's the problem. We're going to play a trick on her tonight and humiliate her in front of everyone so she'll stay away from us. After that, Carter won't have any other choice. But what if she calls someone? Who would Diana call? She has no one. The video ends there. I was glad the whole room was watching in silence. My father allowed a moment of silence. Then he turned to where the Harlow family was standing. Margaret stiff, Diana clutching her bag tightly, and Carter somewhere between. Them, looking like a man watching his house burn from inside. Diana, my father said, the bracelet in your bag belongs to your mother. You must return it now. Diana opened the bag with trembling hands and placed the bracelet on the table beside her. No one moved to pick it up. Margaret. My father's voice was still pleasant. He was still in the mood to talk. You made a moral mistake tonight, he said. You thought Elena had no one with her. That was also a mistake. He reached into his jacket pocket and handed a document to the lawyer beside him, who walked the document forward. Harlow Properties has been operating for 11 years with a credit line provided through Voss Capital affiliates. As of tonight, that line is being recalled. You have 90 days. Vincent Harlow, Carter's father, had been silent all evening. As if the balance of power among strongmen had shifted, he stepped forward. Now, wait a minute. Let's be sensible, Richard. Mr. Voss, my father corrected him without anger. And I am being sensible. The sensible thing would have been for you to behave nicely for 3 years. He looked at Vincent with something that wasn't anger. It was quieter and more enduring than anger. You watched it. At every dinner, at every feast. You watched and said nothing. This is a choice, Vincent. Choices have consequences. Turning back into the room, he said, For the rest of you. His voice now almost soft. I want you to think about what you watched tonight. Not what I just showed you. What you watched before I arrived. The humiliation of a woman, stripped naked in front of you, and none of you stepped forward. He paused. Think about it on the way home, how it would be if it were done to your daughter. Then he turned to me, his voice completely softened, and said, Are you ready to go home? I glanced around the ballroom one more time. Margaret stood motionless, her face expressionless. Diana looked down at the floor. I looked one last time at Carter, the man who had once loved me, or so I thought. I turned to my father and said, Yes, I'm ready. We went outside together. No one could say anything to us. This had happened exactly 15 months earlier. The collapse of Harlow's credit line had created a domino effect, wiping out most of their real estate portfolio within 6 months. Margaret sold her Hamptons mansion in the spring. Diana's name was quietly removed from the boards of all the charities she was a member of. These communities have long memories, and their guest lists are even longer. After filing for divorce, Carter called me twice. I didn't answer either time. Not out of cruelty, just because I really had nothing left to say. I kept my last name, Voss. I always have. I continued working for my father. I founded a foundation 6 months ago for women who feel lonely, and especially for women who feel bad about themselves after marriage. So, I'm one of those women. If you also feel bad, you can support yourself by listening to stories of people who have turned pain into strength. If you want to feel stronger, you're invited to my channel. Don't forget to like the video. I'm curious about your comments. See you in the next story. Goodbye.